All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yvonne Powers, and I'm our product marketing lead here at Finexio. I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar today on best practices for preventing enterprise AP payments fraud in 2023. Now, preventing fraud and accounts payable is crucial for enterprise organizations. Not only does it protect the company's finances, but it also helps maintain the integrity of an organization's reputation. Without proactive fraud prevention measures in place, actors by unknown or bad actors can cause serious repercussions. And on this webinar today, you will learn the following: the rising issues around payments fraud in enterprise payments, how to leverage modern fraud prevention measures, and how moving to electronic payment methods can reduce fraud by 22 times. Now, before we start, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping rules. First, note that this session will be recorded and it will be sent out to attendees sometime to follow after the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the webinar Q&A function. It should be on the bottom of your Zoom webinar screen. And during the webinar, our team will be reviewing your questions and we will have a Q&A session at the end to follow. All right, so now I'd like to introduce you to today's webinar speaker, our CCO at Finexio, Bill Fox, who is a former Deputy Chief of Economic and Cybercrime at the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. So you know that he is absolutely a credible source in speaking to you all on these topics. Bill, take it away.
Thanks, Yvonne. Really looking forward to this today. Thanks, everybody, for coming during your busy work day. As Yvonne said, I prosecuted my first cybercrime case close to 22-ish years ago. So this has been a topic near and dear to my heart for a long time. And at many of the organizations I've worked for before Finexio, I was in one way or another involved in doing cybercrime assessments or developing risk tools, thinking about this across a whole bunch of industries. So what we want to do today is sort of dig into what the effect of cybercrime, and not just cybercrime, but also various other kinds of fraud that can take place in payments, and help you understand how to think about keeping your payments secure and what the best approach to doing that might be. And I might tell a war story or two along the way. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about frauds and account payable, what that looks like, talk about AP transformation and what's going on around automating AP processes and how CFOs are thinking about that, the benefits of using payments technology and moving away from sort of legacy ways of doing these operations. What are the barriers to change? You know, it's not like a push button thing. It's as close as we can get to it. But there are certain barriers to change that you may have to address in your organization, even if you're really gung-ho to do this. So we'll talk about that a little. How accounts payable is being modernized and how you can eliminate these manual legacy payments. And then if you have any questions, as Yvonne said, use the Q&A function, and we'll have some time at the end to answer questions. So we start out with the big one. $40 million accounts payable fraud at Yale University, where you would think they would have it together. And, you know, one of the things that struck me as, I guess, sort of darkly humorous about this was she was made to give back the Mercedes-Benz. And I will tell you, there's always a car involved. I did a whole bunch of cases when I was a prosecutor of doctors' offices, lawyers' offices, where they noticed one day that the person who's in charge of making all the payments shows up to work in a Yukon Denali with chrome wheels. And they think, I'm not paying them enough to have a $125,000 car. What's going on here? And they bring in 10 boxes of paperwork, and they eventually find out that just like here, you know, that person has been running a scam for a long time. You know, what they set up here was she was buying, along with a couple other people that helped out, tons of MacBook Surface Pros, Mac, iPads, Surface Pros, things like that, that were supposedly being used in the emergency department for various purposes to the tune of $40 million and living a lovely luxury life based off this. This person got 9 years in prison. But what you can see here is this was an insider who was facilitating this crime. And it points to the importance of having those fraud controls in place inside your organization. And this is not a one-off sort of incidence. So at Iona College, this was a 10-year scheme where $850,000 was stolen. And this was issuing checks for the person's own use, and then also using college credit cards for making personal purchases and falsifying expense claims. So all these kinds of controls have to be in place inside your organization. The Vassar College one was about $2 million, charging the college for services that had actually not taken place. I think the Vermont one is pretty interesting in that it's only $46,000 into a personal account over a 5-year period. So you're talking like about what, $800 a month, over 60 months. So this was just like kind of for fun money. And I did a number of cases where, insider fraud is often a crime of opportunity. So most insiders don't sort of become employed at the organization for the sole purpose of committing accounts payable fraud. What happens is, say you are getting a lot of checks in, a lot of checks are going out, and you discover some $5,000 check underneath the drawer where you keep all the pencils, and it's from 6 months ago. And you're like, probably nobody is looking for this. I'm going to just I'm going to sign this over to myself, deposit my bank account and see what happens. And nothing happens. And then you're up and running. You realize that this is something that you could probably do every month, maybe every other week, without getting caught. And then, the residence life one is one where they were just stealing cash, payments were being made in cash, and that cash was disappearing. So this just gives you an idea about how these different schemes start and the internal controls that you have to have in place to make sure that it doesn't happen to you. And, a lot of folks think, well, yeah, that happens in like other kind of organizations, and that not really going to happen to me. But there's a 50% increase last year in cyber attacks. And we're going to talk a little further on in the presentation about why I believe that will increase quite a bit next year and the year after. 37% of all businesses that were surveyed in this survey were hit with some kind of ransomware attack. And for those that don't maybe know what ransomware is, this is where somebody hacks in, takes control of some of your data, and then says, all right, you got to pay me $1 million or $5 million or whatever, or I'm going to either destroy this data or expose this data. And then, ransomware attacks are around 20 billion. That is expected to take a 10 times plus increase over the next 10 years. So the importance of having these cyber controls in place are critical. It's very expensive when one of these happen to you. I was involved in, assessing in the aftermath of a bunch of these in healthcare. Especially in my work in a couple of different organizations. And it's extremely expensive if this happens. If you're in healthcare, the OCR can come in after the Office of Civil Rights and decide what kind of fine to assess. And one of the main criteria in them deciding what kind of fine to assess is what were you actually doing to prevent this? And you'll see in some slides going forward that not all organizations are doing everything that they could be doing. A lot of people are experiencing these attempts or actual fraud. Email is crucially important. And this is why training your own people on how to detect these phishing emails is extremely important. And also what's called smishing. So phishing is where people try to get you to do something, open an attachment or do something by email, and they try to might make it look like it might be from somebody in your organization. And there are all these different triggers around urgency, what the request is, what the information they're asking for. You can learn how to sort of float your mouse over the address and see if it's been altered. But there's lots of training that can take place to help your organization not become a victim. And then smishing is if they try to do it with a text. So a lot of people do a lot of communication over text these days. People tend to be more casual over text and not maybe be so careful, which is why it's being used. So the training of your folks internally is extremely important in preventing this happening. Now, this is what I was talking about before. These are just sort of two aspects, two really important things to be doing. One is validating beneficiary payment information. So do you know that the people you're paying are the people you're supposed to be paying, and it's going to the right bank account? So you see here, 36% of organizations rely on whoever is doing this for them to do it. But the 17 and 17 together, that's 34. So that's about a third of people are not doing this at all. I'm assuming that the ones that didn't answer aren't doing it. And you kind of see the same thing here over on the OFAC side. So OFAC is screening to make sure you're not paying bad people, terrorists, you're not participating unwittingly in money laundering. And you see here again, about a third of the people are not doing that at all. And most organizations just simply don't have the budget, the resources, the will to do this on their own, which is one of the reasons as we go through this, we'll have some recommendations on possibly, what's the best way to get this done for accounts payable. This is my favorite slide. Everybody in my organization knows this is my favorite slide. So in cybersecurity, in risk, we talk about attack surface. We're talking about what's your attack surface? How many endpoints are there? How many computers are there in your organization? How many suppliers are you paying? This is one of the simplest things. So this was a survey that asked, what kind of payment method was involved in an attempt or an actual payment fraud. 66% of those were checks. If you slide all the way down through, you get to virtual cards at 3%. So that's what Yvonne said at the beginning of the presentation, that moving to electronic payments alone can lessen your risk by 22 times. I think 3 times 22 is 66. So just keep that in mind when you're considering this. It's not just about, and we'll talk about rebate and getting rid of manual processes and all that, but just this alone can make a, almost complete reduction of your attack surface just by moving to digital payments. Okay, really, this is my favorite slide. All right, this is not a stock photograph. I was in New York for business, and I was walking to the gym at 6:30 in the morning in Soho, and this was some of what was scattered all over the pavement. And I was like, I got to take a picture of this to use on a webinar. So, we'll talk about all the different ways that checks can be counterfeited and defrauded and everything. But this is what you're doing when you put bank account information and routing information on a check and send it off into the US Postal Service. This is not the first time I've ever seen this. This was about, I'm going to say 4 months-ish ago in New York. So, keep this picture in your mind and you think about, checks are fine and it's always been fine. So what are these many ways? And I have prosecuted cases related to almost all of these and helped out companies where this has happened. So obviously counterfeit check is, I get a hold of a business check, I make fakes, and then I do whatever I want with. Remotely created forged checks. So I create a check and I forge one or both of the signatures, whether that's the endorsement or the actual signature or whatever. And then duplicate presentment, that's kind of a new one. newish one. So now that you can deposit a check over your phone, take a picture and deposit it mobily, I can do that while my friend is at a different bank cashing that check in person. So I can kind of duplicate, present that check for cashing. And then I said, the forged endorsement where I can just kind of forge the back of the check. So because it's paper and because it has your bank account information, there's all kinds of fun things that can be done to involve a check in a fraudulent payment, which is why it's 20 times more likely than with certain electronic payment methods. So what do you get in these electronic payment strategies? You get a robust audit trail. So, in our portal, you can always check like when did the ACH go out and where is it? And, all that kind of information is right there in electronic format. That information can be, the bank account information isn't carried on a virtual card. So that information isn't on the thing that you get to get paid. That's for a predetermined transaction amount. And then you can authorize which parties can use that electronic payment. And then straight through processing can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But what it basically means is that there's no one manually touches the payment during the course of that payment. And the less people that have any kind of manual process during that payment, the better off that payment is in terms of fraud. So how, we looked at virtual cards. I think it was 66% for checks and 3% chance for virtual cards. Why is that? Well, one is because they don't carry bank account information. They're not going to get lost or stolen or otherwise tampered with, like trampled on the street like that picture. They're going to usually come in an email and you code in on your computer and it's in your bank. They're only for a specific amount, for a specific period of time of available credit. So that also limits the exposure. And then, as I said, there's no bank account. So that's the fraud side. But if you're only considering it for that, there's actually a lot of other reasons to move to virtual cards. One is they create an interchange, which can create revenue from what was previously a cost center where you're paying your suppliers. It reduces these manual processes, and we'll talk about this a little more. But after the Great Resignation and the current sort of hiring environment, it's very hard to hire people to do stuff like write 1,000 checks every day. Nobody wants to do that work, and there's really no reason nobody should have to do that work. They can do much more strategic work, and then you can offer different sort of back office work to work on more strategic initiatives. People that have been there 5 years, 10 years, they really understand your business, and yet they're still doing something that they shouldn't have to be doing anymore. So this relates to kind of a macro trend throughout the industry. So back then, you could think of this as 20 years ago, or you could think of it as even like kind of immediately pre-COVID. People were doing a lot of manual payments through banks, sending an ACH file, maybe doing the checks themselves, sort of time consuming. And as we've talked about, error prone, which also causes fraud, printing checks that require physical signatures, and then, and also you kind of had if you were lucky enough to be in a business that was rapidly growing, you're like hiring people to do that. Then we have the pandemic, and it really shined a light on how bad the prior system was. So you have people going in and getting a checkbook, writing all those checks, maybe taking it to the CFO's house or like FedExing it to the CFO's house so they can sign those checks, send them back. They're going out in the mail to all these suppliers that are also closed, and then they have to go in and get them and then try to go to the bank that's closed and cash. It's just a mess. So a lot of CFOs during that time and heads of AP, and we're just like, oh, yeah, it's time to fix this. So we helped a lot of organizations during that time do that. So there's this shift to technology-enabled services, much more agile, digital, really takes the manual effort out of this. And now we think about where we are right now. So we all kind of think that there's probably going to be some really hard economic times over the next year, year and a half. Hopefully it won't last much longer than that. But CFOs and AP departments are going to be under tremendous pressure to kind of do more with less. Also, what I've seen multiple times throughout my long career is that when you're in an economic downturn, fraud only increases geometrically with that downturn. So more and more people are going to be trying to run scams and do things, particularly also, insiders as well, but as well as outsiders. We all hear about what's going on in cybercrime, and that will increase in harder economic times. So the time to do this is now, because these solutions have been developed and you can take advantage of them. And it really makes a sea change in how you're doing this work. So if you think, oh, well, I haven't heard a lot of talk about this, or why should I be thinking about this? I mean, almost everyone is either already doing something electronically, maybe not optimally, but they've started that move probably over the pandemic, or they are prioritizing it or very likely to do it soon. So these are the conversations that we're involved in multiple times every single day. And, what's the challenge? So I spent, before I came to Finexio, the founder of Finexio and I worked together before 10 years ago at another company where we saw the need for this, that at that company, we were sending out $100 billion in paper checks. And this is where we saw the need for this kind of thing to happen. But the 8 years in between, I worked at a couple of Silicon Valley unicorn technology companies. We were doing the big digital transformation. And I was having these discussions with CIOs and CFOs and CTOs every week. And those projects were perceived as extremely hard to do. This is going to be really time consuming. And, I'm not technologically acute, so I don't know what to do. And I don't have the expertise to understand this. And the cost is going to be, sort of prohibitive. What's nice about it, which is great for me, and and the folks on my sales teams and us as a company, is that is not the case with doing this in payments. It's actually something that can be done very straightforwardly. In 6-8 weeks, you can be on electronic payments. Can be very comprehensive and much better than what is probably being done with potentially a bank at the current time. One of the things that proves this out, that's easy to say, but now we're going to talk a little about Finexio, how we do it. Like, we know best how we're doing this. We've been growing, at an astronomical rate. And one of the things you can see in kind of these investors and partners is that they're banks. Some of them very big banks like JP Morgan Chase, big credit card companies like Discover, our partnership with MasterCard. So these large organizations who are investing in us and partnering with us understand that, that's not the core business of a bank. The core business of a bank is lending money, holding money, et cetera. They understand the need for a solution like Finexio that actually takes the entire payment process and it becomes a service. So we at Finexio, we call it AP Payments as a Service. We have, between our board and our executives, hundreds of years of payments experience. And we kind of put our heads together and came up with what we thought was the optimum way to do this. So it's not just making the payments. Yes, we're going to make all the payments regardless of whether they're check, wire, ACH, V-card, e-check, whatever that is, we're going to do that. But it's the service that's around that. And we're going to focus today on payment data and management and security, but also the supplier enablement part, the signing up the suppliers, the holding bank account information, the KYC, the OFAC, the dynamic reporting that you get on a portal. We'll focus more on the data management and security today, but it really is a full service. So, kind of why do you want to do this, and what do we mean when we say data management and security? We'll dig into this a little now. we want to make it so that when you move over to payments as a service, you're also getting peace of mind. So we're going to store that securely. We're constantly cleaning data and enriching data, and then preventing fraud through these various safeguards and controls and policies and certifications, some of which our customers aren't even aware they should be complying with. But of course, we're up on all of that and do that all the time. So how do electronic payments decrease fraud? We've kind of talked about this a lot, but as you pull back and look at it, there's account validation services that we're doing to make sure that we're paying the right bank account. There's know your customer. So that's understanding the risk involved in paying certain kinds of businesses and ensure that we're doing business not with bad actors, but with the right customers that you're suppliers and customers that you're supposed to be paying. We also do OFAC screening. I talked a little about OFAC before, but this is making sure that you're not unintentionally processing money that's actually being laundered by terrorists and other bad actors. And then AML compliance through monitoring the transactions at a very granular level to sort of monitor those. AML stands for anti-money laundering. So you're also looking at all the transactions in a granular way to reduce the risk and costs associated with doing these manual operations. Not going to go real deeply into that, but we work with a managed service provider called Diopath that supplies us with sort of top of the line best end-to-end security, both in terms of managed service as well as where we store the data, recovery, monitoring this all the time. The service desk is always open, compliance with SOC 2 and other standards that we need to comply with. So what I found in my experience, both on the prosecution side and other side, was that very few companies have the wherewithal to do this, because this isn't what you do. You're treating patients or building buildings or managing properties or whatever it is, and this is sort of a have to do. For us, this is what we eat and breathe every day. So there's both sort of organizational security. So and this applies to us, sort of the training that we do for all our employees, the employee background checks, and we constantly upgrade that training and do it again and again. And then also the platform security. So we're powered by AWS, so we have obviously all the controls that they have in place, and then we add on to that with our own security to make sure that we're as secure as we can be, which is why we are doing all the SOC 2 and things like that to make sure that that's all in place. So what we're delivering to the finance team, how we want finance teams to think about doing this is not that this creates a risk. And this was very similar to something I saw in the data when we were doing database, when I was doing database at prior companies, was there's this perception that like, oh, my data is okay now, but when I move it over here, then that puts it at risk, when actually it becomes much more secure. So it's the same thing here. As you use this service and outsource your AP payments to a company like Finexio, actually the whole operation becomes much more secure. So getting out from under the manual payments, reducing risk, having sort of state-of-the-art fraud prevention in place, and then gaining that security, that's how we think the best way to get out from under, decrease the attack surface, get out from under the constant risk, from under these manual processes, and actually gain all the efficiencies of moving to a digital platform. So Yvonne's going to talk a little about some takeaways, and then we'll move into Q&A.
All right, thanks, Bill. So everyone, here are a few assets to expect to follow sometime after the webinar, along with the recording. We have on the left-hand side, the Accounts Payable Fraud Prevention Playbook. And in this white paper, we outline the types of fraud that can occur in accounts payable. There's some case studies in there involving the most common types of AP fraud, common red flags to watch out for, and best practices to prevent these things from happening. And it includes a lot of data points too, truly a great read there. And on the right-hand side, we have an image of our Finexio AP Payments as a Service security framework. It's a checklist one-pager It runs through all of Finexio's security and compliance measures that we have in place so that you can really have peace of mind that security is top of mind here at Finexio. Back to you, Bill.
Yeah, so listen, before we go to the Q&A, you have my email address. Feel free to shoot me an email if you want to talk about this more or understand more about Finexio. Love to talk about this stuff. I've been doing it for a very long time, so happy to sort of talk to anyone about what they're concerned with. And I hope this was valuable information. Follow us on LinkedIn. I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn about this. Kind of keep up with what we're doing. So I think now we will go to the Q&A.
Yes. Awesome. So we do have a question that came in here. It states, what are the transaction fees for a virtual card? Are they similar to the 2 or 3% on credit cards?
Yeah, they're similar. I mean, I don't want to get into the details of that in this forum, but yeah, they're similar. And people will ask sometimes, like, why would people do that? Like, why would anyone pay that to get a virtual card versus a check? Well, hopefully after everything I said, you'll kind of have one idea about why people do that, but also a lot of, so obviously there's a massive reduction in the risk of fraud. But also, a lot of companies are on 45-day check terms or 60 days or 90 days, and then it goes through the mail. Maybe it gets there in 3 days, maybe it gets lost. They can't track it. So, we sign up like 1,500-ish people a month for V-card payments who are currently receiving checks. So a lot of people will do that, even though there is that slight fee associated with it for reasons of, I want to get my money sooner. I want to get it more securely. I don't have to worry about it. I want it to come in an email and then just ding, ding, ding. And some people even do a card by mail. It's still more secure, although it's still going through the mail. So there's lots of reasons to switch over to that. And I've had to talk to a lot of our customers about the fact that the suppliers will actually do this. And we've signed up tens of thousands of them. So we know that.
Okay. We have a question from the audience. Can I do this with my bank? Are banks more secure than what you are offering at Finexio?
No and no. You can't do this with your bank. Banks do not offer this full suite of services. Banks will make some kind of payments. You can send them an ACH file and they might pay the ACHs. They generally will not take over the check portion. Generally, when banks do a V-card program, they'll come in maybe once or twice. So they'll take a run at a selected group, usually at the top end of your suppliers. They might average 3-4% signing up on the V-card. We're running well over 15%, so 3 to 4 times what you would expect to get from the bank. So, and then also banks aren't doing that supplier enablement piece. So they're not reaching out to your suppliers and, handling those kinds of changes. And also generally they're not offering the kind of transparency and visibility that you have into that, that we offer. So the reason, as I showed on that one slide, that JPMorgan Chase and Valley and Bank and others have invested in us and are partnering with us as their payments partner is because this is not the business that they're in and they don't offer this kind of service.
Yeah, thanks for that, Bill. All right. We have a question that came in. If I take advantage of Finexio services, what else do I get aside from security?
Yeah, so I think I've talked about this and that's a good sort of question. Just email me and we can kind of talk through the whole thing. But it is truly AP payments as a service. So on day one, you're never writing or signing or seeing another, sending out another paper check because we take that over as well as the positive pay on that. So on day one, you're completely out from under that manual process. You have this beautiful portal that you can access and see all your payments, generally in a way that our customers haven't seen before. Your suppliers are also getting a portal so they can check in on where their ACH or their check or their V card is without calling you. And we offer customer support as well. And then we're sort of in an ongoing process to maximize the potential revenue share and get your suppliers onto electronic payments. So you're getting a full suite that happens to include all the stuff we talked about today, but it really is a full as a service offering.
Right. Yeah, we're definitely offering technology mixed with that human element with that service.
Exactly.
Right. We have another question that came in. What is the typical turnaround time to implement Finexio as a service?
It can depend on some stuff, but 6 to 8 weeks. It's not a heavy lift. It can be done as simply as having a file drop of an okay to pay file. So you're just saying, here's what really needs to get paid. This is how they need to get paid, and we pay them. So there's some integration up front. Some of our customers eventually move to kind of full API, and we have that technology, certainly. But it's a pretty light lift at the beginning, and I would put it somewhere in that 6 to 8 week range.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for that, Bill. Right. What's a proactive approach that we should be doing tomorrow to help us with internal fraud protection?
Yeah, I think that's the stuff that we kind of talked about at the beginning. So it's very, it is crucial to understand cybersecurity and have those measures in place in your technology stack. But it's also crucial to understand that insider threat is super important. So having the monitoring of those trend of what your people are doing, physical security around who needs to be in what area, when, pass cards and things like that, having them understand sort of common fraud mechanisms, like if there's somebody walking around with a pizza saying like, oh, the front desk person, now I'm lost. Like if they're not supposed to be there, they need to get walked back out to the front desk, where you'll find that front desk person didn't let them in and they're not supposed to be there, and they're wandering around the office hoping to pick up some stickies off of computers with passwords and stuff. So, and then having the training, especially on how phishing and smishing work and what to look for as suspicious. Your boss is not texting you asking to send him $1,000 by Venmo. That's not real. Or that, it looks like it's coming, we need your bank account, it's from supposedly from your finance department asking you for your bank account information, or you're not going to get paid tomorrow. That urgency is a signal. So there's all these things that you can do starting today to decrease all that kind of risk.
Perfect. Thank you. And so do you have a war story from when you were a prosecutor that you could share with our audience today?
Yeah, I've got a lot of them. It was wild times. It was the beginning of sort of cybercrime. I actually had Patriot Act signing authority. So at the time, if you'll recall, you could get an internet account on Yahoo without any personal information. But if you pierce that, you could get the personal information. And the first person, I think this is true. I think we were the first cybercrime unit in any district attorney's office in the country. And I believe that I locked up the first person for a cyber threat not carried out in Pennsylvania. So there was a pretty controversial newspaper guy, editorial writer, and he used to write about his girlfriend in the paper. And they started getting horrendous threats through email on his life, on her life, like really bad Hannibal Lecter-y kind of stuff. And it just so happened that the general counsel of the newspaper sat next to me in law school. And he called me and he was like, this is going on. Can you guys do anything about this? But everything was so primitive back then that we found out that it was coming from the Philadelphia Library computer, a Philadelphia Library computer. There were 600 of those computers. They were all going through one filter to make sure that no kids got on the wrong websites when they were at the library. So we actually had to do sort of a physical shutting down of the entire library computer system every time there was a threat and go backwards through the logs to find it. So thankfully today, we don't have to do that kind of stuff. It's a double-edged sword. Obviously, the criminals get more sophisticated, we get more sophisticated. And there's a saying in cybercrime, you know, the bad guy only has to get lucky once. We got to get lucky every time. So putting as many layers of this in place and making sure that you're monitoring all the time is the best thing that you can do to reduce that attack surface.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that story.
Sure.
And I think, unless there's
Okay.
any last moment questions, I think we've covered everything in our webinar today.
Great. So thanks everybody for taking time. I really hope to hear from some people, and you know, we're happy to talk about this or hopefully, you know, what Finexio can, how we can work together. I want to thank Yvonne for facilitating today and making sure that this all ran correctly. Watch your email for a copy of the webinar as well as those documents Yvonne talked about. And I hope everybody has a great rest of their week.
Yes, and thank you, Bill, for being a great guest speaker. Thank you, everyone. We will be in touch. Take care.
So long.